This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
Okay, I bet that some of you are imagining that
I'm going to include the latest Red Bull in this list, but there are worse examples out there that I want to talk to you about. So here are 10 examples from Formula One's history which really let their respective sides down. A moment where people would go, "Oh my god, what the hell happened?" I am starting off with a Red Bull, but it's the RB2 in this case. The second Red Bull car aimed at refining its initial design, building a foundation for future success. So yes, I think it's quite safe to say that, considering that they weren't too dreadful in 2005, they started off relatively competently, despite people deriding them considerably because they were the party team, that this would be just a steady evolution that they would learn from last year and then go from there. And of course, with Adrian Newey arriving in 2006, he might be able to just sprinkle some magic over it over the course of the season. But in reality, he was really destined for the RB3. The RB2's race performance was inconsistent. Mechanical limitations and issues in tyre performance really exposed the developmental shortcomings of this relatively young outfit. So even though it's not exactly surprising that the RB2 wasn't that great, it still would have been a really nasty kick in the teeth for Christian Horner, considering how much of a greenhorn he was in terms of being at the pinnacle of motorsport, single-seater racing, that maybe it was a sign for optimism for the future. But no, it was sort of just one last hurrah for the revolution of Jaguar, where there was so much hype going into it and then so much disappointment. Thankfully, it did improve, so it's relatively low on the list. There are worse examples out there, including the March 2-4-0. This was a radical example that reimagined the infamous Tyrrell P34, that instead of putting four wheels at the front, they were at the back. That may be to try and get some more aerodynamic efficiency, that you had those four wheels at the back instead of the front, that maybe this might unlock some potential, that the concept of having six wheels on your wagon may have had legs. However, during early tests at Silverstone, according to the Wikipedia entry, critical mechanical issues emerged, including gearbox flex and unmeshed gears. Whilst the design initially generated a lot of media attention, because, well, six wheels, and a lot of debate amongst the engineers and fans, it was just completely and utterly impractical. So yes, this might have been a tour de force, and you might be wondering, why on earth is this even on this list if it really didn't get into competitive racing? It was a real hope that March might have turned a corner back in the 70s and 80s when aerodynamic understanding was relatively in its infancy in compared to now. We're thinking, well, hey, there might be something here. But ultimately, as we now know, considering, well, there are four wheels on modern cars, it wasn't meant to be. Although it does remain an interesting what-if in Formula One history. And also, I just really wanted to tell you about it because it was just different, unlike the P34, which many Formula One fans boning up on its history would probably already know about. So there you go, the March 2-4-0. By the way, before we continue, I just want to thank the sponsors of today's video, Squarespace. The all-in-one platform for, in this case, laddermen like me, which means I can then give it a go when it comes to web design. Squarespace makes it effortless to build a stunning website, engage your audience, and even sell your products or services, all on your own terms. One of the features I wish to make use of as I begin my journey is the cutting-edge design tools. With Blueprint AI, I could potentially generate a custom site in just a few steps. I can get personalized design recommendations which really vibe with my overall design aesthetic, that obviously involving ladders, and plus the drag and drop editor makes it super easy to adjust layouts and add creative touches without any hassle. So when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/LawVS to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So one more time, thank you so much Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So let's get off to the 8th most significant Formula One car, which truly flopped. The Benetton B196. It emerged after the championship-winning B195, the machine that got Michael Schumacher his second title, inheriting huge expectations, understandably, with that legacy for success. And not to mention, two Ferrari drivers piloting it. Alesi and Berger, they both came to Benetton at the same time, and their insight and experience with Ferrari was obviously a positive boon. However, there was a real major issue to contend with, in that Berger and Alesi's driving styles, they were not really compatible with what was developed with Michael Schumacher in charge, because, well, you know, B195 successful, hey, B196, there you go. Despite being built as a logical evolution, it quickly was revealed that it had plenty of drawbacks. Its handling was difficult, the balance was less refined, leading to results at races which were all over the place. Although the car did manage to secure several podiums, and it had moments where it was pretty quick, it failed to live up to the hype of its two predecessors. And it really was just a sign that Benetton's best days were over for the foreseeable future. Not until Renault would step in and Fernando Alonso would really rise to the occasion in the 2000s. That it just really showed that just changing little bits here, little bits there, personnel coming and going, drivers especially, it can really make the difference from a car being somewhat competitive to suddenly just being like, I don't know. And then the Jaguar R3. It was developed as an attempt to turn around a series of poor results following arguably the even worse R2. There was a lot of hope going into this machine the third time around for Jaguar. And quite frankly, I think they were just hoping for something to emulate 1999, where Jackie Stewart had a car which managed to drag itself to 4th place in the Constructors, technically best of the rest. No, those days were long gone, and the R3 proved to be just an absolute damp squib. Not even the presence of Niki Lauda could save it. In fact, it was so bad, it ultimately led to Eddie Irvine completely losing his love for Formula One and retiring at the end of the year. Yeah, when a car is so bad that it makes a driver question their life choices, yeah, it deserves a place on this list. Because Irvine and De La Rosa, they found the car challenging to get any sort of performance from it. It constantly underperformed in power and handling. And despite there being a relatively steady upgrade package, it never reached promised levels of competitiveness. So yeah, it was really not reflective of the Jaguar brand. But then you got to remember, at that time in Jaguar's history, it was just a very pretty looking cat badge of the overall Ford brand. Which is just a shame, because it just makes me think, oh man, what if Jackie Stewart just held on to that team, eh? I mean, had he not gotten into bed entirely with Ford and kept control, this team might have actually turned out to be pretty good. But then, as we all know, it did become Red Bull, so, you know, swings and roundabouts. And we swing over to number 6 with the Haas VF-19. This being the follow-up to the 2018 car, which saw Haas find itself in the dizzying heights of 5th place in the Constructors. Not to mention, this was going into Haas's 3rd season, and they were on an upward trajectory, which was really impressive for a completely brand new team that had no affiliation or buying out of a previous team. They started in 2016, they managed to get a team up and running within 18 months, which is really impressive. They were not slow either, they were in the mix in the lower end of the midfield, but they weren't propping up the entire order. That was really commendable. 2018, even better. This might have been a chance for some sort of redemption arc or revenge arc for K-Mag and Roman. But then 2019 happened, aside from all of the shenanigans involving Rich Energy. This, in this case, has nothing to do with that. It's to do with the development of the car, which ultimately got the team so far off course, it led to a problem with its tyres that lasted for years. Grosjean and Magnussen, they experienced a roller coaster of results, with flashes of speed often undermined by mechanical setbacks, including the erratic handling from the tyre performance. And quite honestly, it really revealed that sure, Gunther Steiner knew how to set up a Formula One team and maintain it at the beginning. But in 2019, there were also major technical rule changes, and then suffer for it for a good long time. And it did lead to a period of, you know, a downward spiral, which saw Haas barely make itself out of the bottom couple of teams. Yeah, it was a reality check for Steiner. And then, of course, with Richard Story and Rich Energy, oh, it was just a really bad year after such a really good one the previous year. But hey, it's nowhere near as jarring as what happened with Mercedes in 2022, am I right? Because the Mercedes W13, it was launched in the shadow of the W12, which saw yet another Constructors' Championship, with Lewis Hamilton narrowly missing out on his 8th world title. So naturally, there'd be sky-high expectations for continued dominance going into the ground effect era of Formula One. And also, not to mention, there was the introduction of the Zero Pod at the 2nd test session. Because at the first session they had a dummy rig with standard side pods, and then at the second one, boom, they suddenly disappeared, and people were like, ooh, no side pods. Many people thinking it was going to be just like gas all over again from 2020. But no, it was it was not like Das at all. It was a moment where Toto was just going, oh my god, what exactly is happening? Why aren't we winning every single race? This is not like what it was meant to be. These issues, combined with problems in suspension tuning, and then of course porpoising, the W13 often failed to deliver consistent results and was a major shock, arguably sending Mercedes into a funk that it's only just really started to get itself out of. And what was really not helpful is that in the wake of the cost cap, Mercedes just couldn't buy their way out of the problem and come up with a brand new part the following week. They had to be strategic with their developments, and it was such a good thing that George Russell was around, scoring consistent top 5 finishes in the first half of the season to provide any sort of hope that Mercedes could have a chance at sniffing second place in the Constructors. That doesn't sound really bad, but you got to remember, this was off of the back of one of the most dominant eras in Formula One history. For that to suddenly fall? Whoa. But as you will discover later on in this list, that this wasn't the first time. There was a previous one, which arguably was even more impactful. But McLaren's in 2013? It was really tough to choose, but the MP4-28 of 2013, it was probably the most glaring example of a reality check within the early 2010s. The car was built with ambitious aerodynamic concept, innovative suspension setups that were meant to extract every possible performance gain to ride off the coattails of 2012, where it looked fairly substantial and solid. But as I recall from reading Adrian Newey's book, he was observing what was going on at his old team McLaren and realizing that they keep changing the concept every single year. There's no baseline. They have to just start from square one again, and also going into 2014 when the rules were about to change themselves considerably. So essentially, McLaren just made a rod for their own back. They may as well just continued with the 2012 concept. And then on top of that, there was the mismatch of Jenson Button and Sergio Perez. Yes, Sergio Perez was a really big name talent, but his presence there, it was simply not compatible with the clinical environment that Ron Dennis had manifested. Had they not learnt what happened with Juan Pablo Montoya back in the 2000s? And on top of that, its unconventional design choices failed to translate into competitive race pace, which saw neither driver secure a podium that year. A first for McLaren in a very, very long time. It was simply an underbaked good right before the rules were about to change. It was really a painful memory in that even those at the top, one of the front runners, can easily miss the mark. It was a really bad shout, but hey, at least they were scoring some solid points. They were in the mix in the top 5 at least. Yeah, I mean, the MP430 you'd be thinking was on here, but I would imagine that this was like the first shock, the first tremor, arguably. It was one, as an observer of McLaren, I was thinking, oh, that's not good. Ooh. Much like how it was for BMW with their F109. Following an impressive 2008 season which saw BMW Sauber achieve its first and only win, the 2009 iteration was expected to capitalise on that momentum and elevate the team's standing in F1, especially considering that they took the bold step in just completely axing development for 2008 right when Robert Kubica was on some sort of groove after Canada, and he was incredibly irate, he and his teammate Heidfeld, in that, why are you stopping? BMW was looking like, potentially in the second half of the season, a compelling rival to the likes of Ferrari and McLaren. This could have been the next step upward, but no. Like with many other teams, they decided to just cut and run, move on to the next year with the brand new regulations, and then failed miserably. It's a logical risk, but you need to have the right people behind it to make that work and make most of that time. Qualifying sessions were plagued with inconsistency. Despite the odd podium finish, the F109 just could not maintain a competitive pace throughout the entire season, no matter how hard they try, because, put simply, they had a slower rate of development when compared to other teams. In fact, it was so bad, and this was also in the midst and the aftermath of the economic crisis of 2008, that BMW, then also Toyota, pulled out of the sport. And it was such a huge seismic shift, Peter Sauber having to step in at the very last minute and save his team from completely dissolving. And yeah, BMW, Toyota, they're just 2 prime examples that, hey, you may have a lot of money, but you've got to use it right. It's not the size, mate. Is how you use it. But at least they had some experience, unlike the people behind the Life F190, widely regarded as one of the most notorious failures in the sport's history. embodying the risks inherent in radical engineering ideas without enough practical backing. Designed by Life Racing engines, the F190 was built on a repurposed chassis from lower-tier racing and fitted with an unconventional W12 engine. W12s, they were relatively unheard of in the world of Formula One. No one really thought about it in terms of a concept. It did attract a lot of interest at the beginning, thinking, could this be an alternative to V12s, V10s, V8s? Something that's a little bit more unorthodox? Are there some benefits to it? This might have worked if you had the funds to back it up and come up with a lightweight machine, but Life didn't have that, and they suffered hard. And notoriously hard. You think the Lola of 1997 was a boat? At least it was within a snifter of maybe qualifying, and I also let Lola off the hook here because, to be fair, it wasn't their fault they failed miserably. It was MasterCard rushing them in the door of Formula One. Had they waited until 1998, they might have actually stood a chance of, qualifying consistently, and, Suspiria, man. Michael Schumacher believed in you so much. What might have been, eh? But yes, the F190, it consistently failed to pre-qualify. With its performance so far below the benchmark, it became synonymous with failure. For the longest time, it's just been an absolute joke. Sure, sometimes taking a punt on a particular innovation might be worth it, it might not be worth it, but sometimes it can absolutely be disastrous. And speaking of disastrous, considering that I was a Michael Schumacher fan back in the day, and I was reveling in the headiness, the absolute euphoria of the Ferrari domination era, 2005, oh my god, I have personal experience, which is why the F2005 is at the top of my list. My list. It was anticipated to be the natural successor to the dominant F2004, carrying the weight of Ferrari's illustrious legacy, and Michael Schumacher. However, upon its debut, the car quickly revealed a series of critical shortcomings, plagued by hydraulic failures, aerodynamic inefficiencies, and problematic tyre performance, which seriously was not helped by the fact that that year you couldn't change your tyres. So put simply, Bridgestone was at a really bad disadvantage considering many of the other teams on the grid were rubbered up by Michelin, and that amount of research and development from multiple teams, that helped tremendously, whereas essentially Bridgestone only had Ferrari and Jordan and Minardi by default. But let's be real here. At that point, Bridgestone were only really supplying and dedicating their efforts to Ferrari. It was a major disadvantage that not even Ferrari's car could try and make up the difference from. That was a real Achilles heel. And it also served to provide Michael Schumacher's only victory by the fact that nobody from Michelin turned up. So it is safe to understand, I think Michael Schumacher himself would have been absolutely shocked beyond belief. The car's inability to deliver not only disrupted Ferrari's momentum, it also forced a major internal reassessment of technical and managerial strategies. That the formula that had been so good up until then maybe needed some reassessment or rejigging. Ultimately, its disastrous debut marked one of the lowest points in Ferrari's recent history. It really does go to show that even though you might have something good, it can only last for so long. I'm looking at you, Mercedes, Red Bull. Ferrari was a major example of that. But when you take in isolation the first day on the job for Yuki Tsunoda at Red Bull Racing, the signs are that in the not too distant future, the team might find ways to turn itself around and maybe find a way to get back up to the top again after a really big reality check. To find out why there is a cause for optimism and why I think Yuki Tsunoda could really benefit Red Bull Racing as a whole and keep Max Verstappen there for as long as possible, watch this video next, straight after this one.